Hello there. Welcome to the second subpart of Code First approach. In the last part, we had installed the required widget packages in the repositories layer. We then created the models for our tables, and finally, we created the context. In this video, we will start with the Code First migrations. To do that, the first thing we have to do is to open up the package manager console. These are the different ways to open up the package manager console. I prefer the second one. Post that, we'll have to then set up the startup project as repositories layer. We'll also have to set the default project as repositories layer. And finally, we will then run these commands to enable our migrations. So the first one is enable migrations. We normally don't need this in Entity Framework code, mostly in EF6, which is for non-core versions. The next command, we will use it, add migration, and then we'll provide the migration name. And then we will just say update database and then dash verbose. Verbose basically will help us to override the existing database if there is any. Once we finish up this code first migration, we will then use the insert query script which is there in the scripts folder to load our database with some data. Alright, so before we do all these steps, I just want to let you know these are the commands we can use to understand a particular command. So when we say get help add migration dash detailed, this will give us all the information related to this add migration line. The same for update database. When we run this line, you will get all the details related to update database line, right? Okay, let's jump into the code right now and start with our changes. All right, we'll open up the package manager console first. So as I said, my preferable way is this: tools, the package manager console. This is opening up the package manager console here. All right, it's up. The second one was to set up the startup project as repositories layer. So I'm going to right click here and click on this set as startup project. Post that. The third point was to set the default project to repositories layer. So I'm going to do that here. And now we had to run the migration lines. But before that, I will actually prefer to run these lines instead. Let us understand what all information we get for the add migration command. I'm going to scroll up. And as you see here, the name is add migration, adds a new migration. This is the syntax: add migration name, the output directory, the context, project, and the startup project. You can mention everything here. The parameters, so this will give you all the details: name, what is the output directory. You can specify an output directory. You can also specify the context type, the project you want to use, the startup project, and common parameters like warning variable, outbug for pipeline variable, and etc. etc. So you get all the information here. You can read about it yourself. I'm going to run the second line again. Get help update database detailed. So again, when I run this, I get the syntax. This is the syntax. It has the migration, which is a string, the context, the project, the startup project, and many more things. So you can read about all the parameters here. One thing what we saw in the slide was this command verbose. This basically overrides the existing database if there is any, as we discussed last time. So it's the same thing, it is mentioned here. Great. Now let's run the commands. So add migration and then the migration name. For now I'm going to name it initial migration, and if you can enter, the build has started. The build should succeed soon, and we should be able to see. Okay, I see an error here. What does it say? No database provider has been configured for the DB context. Okay, let's see the configuring method. Well, this is the one, right, on configuring. And yeah, I see one problem here. In the previous video, I did one mistake. I forgot to mention a not in front. Basically, if the options builder objects is configured is false, only in that case we'll go inside and use the use SQL Server method to provide the connection string, right? That way, the configuration will be clear enough to go ahead with SQL Server as the provider, the database, and the connection string. Correct? So yeah, that was the mistake I did, and I apologize for it. Let's proceed forward with this now. I'll run this migration again. The build started, the build succeeded, and we see a folder here, migrations. So if you see this folder, migrations, inside this you have the file. You see the same words, initial migration, the words we had provided earlier, and you also see the date timestamp. So it's 2022, September 12th, right? And if you see this file, you will see two methods, up and down, right? The up one basically creates new things, new tables, new index keys, new foreign keys, etc., etc. And the down key deletes or drop tables or any information. For example, removing a column from a table. That will be done in the down method. Alright. Now that we have the migrations created, let's run the line update database and see the changes in SSMS. Alright, let's open up the package manager console and run the line update database, and with this I'll also add the line for host. Once I do that, the page will start, it will succeed, and it will log multiple lines in the terminal. Hoping to see a success which is very soon. Okay, I see the create database command here and few tables as well, primary keys also I saw, I guess. Okay, it is printing a lot of things, and yeah, it's done. So the solution is saying we have successfully created the database. Let's look into the database now in SQL Server Management Studio and confirm if it has actually created one database. So I'll open up the SSMS, click on Object Explorer, connect database engine. I'll connect the local host server, open up the databases. So yeah, I have these two extra databases, auth and branding. This is for my personal portfolio website. You can skip this too. Let's open up the EMS database. Inside this, we should see three tables: competencies, departments, and employees. We also see an extra table, EF migrations history. If I do a select in here, I should see that word initial migration. This table will keep track of all the migrations we had done. Yeah, so as you see here, initial migration with the product version. Superb. Let's close this and again check for all the index keys or foreign keys if there are any. So for the columns, for competencies, we see 4. This is the primary key. Awesome. We also see not null mentioned here. Do we have an index key? Yes, I do see the IX competencies, and I'm pretty sure it's for the main column. We also see the primary key. Great. Let's open up the departments. Should be the same: columns, keys, indexes. Okay, everything seems to be good here. And in the employees, I should see the columns. Yep, and these are not null. Good. These two are null. Okay. Opening up the keys, I see the primary key, the foreign key for employees and competencies, for employees and departments as well. And in the indexes, I see three unique keys. The first one will be for email for sure. The second one is for competency ID. The third one is for department. And finally, the fourth one is the primary key. Great. So everything has worked as expected. And one more thing to notice, you see the table names, right? In the code base, I had named it singular: competency, department, employee. But in SQL Server, I see the names pluralized: competencies, departments, employees, just as we discussed in the last video. Super. Well, now is the time to import all the data into this database. Let's switch back to the code base. And now if you click on this button just after this home icon, it will give you an option to switch the view to either a solution or folder view. You open up the folder view, and in this branch, part 10, in the scripts folder, you will see this file ems.sql. This is almost the same file we had used in our database first approach video, just that in this one we only have the data and not the create scripts for tables or database, right? So I'm going to use the same script to load up our existing database, and you can also do the same just by taking a pull from this branch part 10 and looking into the scripts folder. Okay, let's open up the file quickly. I'll fast forward this. Alright, and select this. So now if I just simply click on execute, or if I click on F5, all these queries will run and database will be updated with the latest values, right? You see multiple messages printed here. Let's open up the Object Explorer. Let's do a quick select. Okay, I see data here. Great. Let's do the same for departments. I see data here as well. Super. And in employees, I see data as well. Awesome. Alright, so that ends the part of enabling migrations, creating database, and loading up data into the database. Up next, let's start with the repository class changes. I'll switch back to the code base. Let's close all these files here. Go back to the solution view. Let's open up the repository file now. Okay. So we have a lot of things to change here. For example, the variable will now be replaced with context and many more things in the below methods. I won't be writing all the changes live right now since I have already done it in the past video, database first approach second part in the playlist. Instead, I have the code copied here, so I'll select the entire thing and just replace it here. What we will do is we'll discuss about the changes we have done. So let me open up the employee repository, and you see a lot of changes here. The left hand side has all the code that was removed, and the right hand side with the green color is the new code that has been added. So let us start. First you see the using statement, database context. Let me unpin this. Yeah, so first you see the database context, right? We are adding the using statement. Then we are adding this employee file from the repositories. We are using it as a employee DL to refer that model. So in here you see the private variable. It's a read-only variable, the EMS context file, and we have named it context. We have also created a new constructor, employee repository, which gets this EMS context variable and assigns it to the global variable context here. Okay, now in the get employee by ID method, instead of using the employee list, we are now using context.employees, and instead of just selecting the employee, we will now be newly initializing the employee model, and we will be specifically mentioning what all properties we want from the model. Okay, so for the get employees, we have kept it the exact same except for one thing. Instead of employee list, we are now using the employees DB set, which is the employee table. Get employee by name also has the employee list removed and instead context.employees added. One small problem here, since we are now using DB sets of context to get the employee by name, this particular part won't work. The string comparison dot ordinal ignore case won't work. It will throw an error. That's why what we're doing is we are converting the name of the employee DB set from the context file to a lower, and then we are checking with the name we have received from the front end. We are doing a lower for that as well, and then checking if both the values match. If yes, we see a lot of properties assigned for this employee model. But yeah, if you notice this, you will see competency ID and department ID properties which are not there in the employee model, as you see here. This is the new change we have added. So to make sure this code works properly and we do get the competency and department ID, we will add these two properties here. So prop int competency ID, and then again prop integer department ID. Alright, now if you see it, the error should go off, and yeah, there it is, it has went off. For the create employee, earlier we were using the employee list, now we are using context.employees. We are first checking if there is already an employee with the same name. Actually this should not be name and email instead, right? Because we have added the unique key constraint for the email column, not the name one, right? So that's why they should be email. Okay, and then here this part is totally removed, the max employee ID, because now we are using an identity column in the SQL Server table, so this won't be needed anymore. Here we are creating a new model instead and assigning all the parameters. You also see this created on and updated on, which is assigned the current date time. So the moment this code runs, that exact time will be recorded for the created on and updated on while creating the new employee. And if you see here, earlier we were doing employee list dot add employee, but now we'll use the context variables employees DB set and add the new employee. We are also writing this line context.save changes, because without this, the changes actually won't get affected in the database. Every time we do a create, update or delete, we have to make sure this line is ran specifically after doing the changes, else the table won't have the new changes reflected. Okay, now in the update employee, we are doing the same thing. Instead of employee list, we are now using the context employees DB set. The properties have changed from competency to competency ID. The same for department to department ID. A new column has been also added, updated on with the current date time. So every time you update an employee, the updated on column also gets updated accordingly. And here again, we are using the context.save changes to reflect the changes in the database. And for the delete employee, the same thing. Instead of employee list, context.employees, and below, instead of using employee list.remove, we are saying context.employees.remove. And again the same thing here, save changes to make sure the record has been deleted from the employee table. Great, so I'm going to save this and close it off. That's the part for employee repository. But wait, tell me one thing, will this repository's constructor get the EMS context? What do you think about it? If you are thinking no, it won't get it, well then yes, you are in the right path. So what we have to do is, just like we added the lifetime methods for the repository and the servers file in the startup class, the same way we have to do it for the database as well. But we won't be writing add scope, transient or singleton for the database. Instead, we will be using a separate method named as add db context. So let me add that. Yeah, this is the one. And instead of writing the entire thing, I have it copied here. I'll simply copy this and paste it here. So yeah, so there is this add db context which comes from the dependency injection using statement. I think it's already added. Yeah, this one. So yeah, you have to add the context lines using statement. And for this to use SQL Server, we will be using Entity Framework Core. The same for this one, lazy loading proxies. I intentionally kept this empty. So get connection string. We have to provide a name for this. Let's provide EMS database. Okay. So what does this do? We first call the method addDB context. We provide the type for the context, which is EMS context. And inside this, we open up an anonymous function with the variable options. We use options.useSQL method to provide our connection string. This configuration variable, which is a global variable for the startup class, basically gets you all the information from AppSettings.json and many more actually. So it has this function get connection string, which will specifically get you a connection string from the list of connection strings. We will add that in a minute in app settings. Post that, we use this use lazy loading proxies method, which helps you for the lazy loading. If you remember in the previous video when we were adding the DB sets, we had used this keyword virtual. We actually added that to enable the lazy loading, and by using this method, we actually enable it. Alright, that's from the startup point of view. Now we also have to add this EMS database connection string in the app settings. So let's do that. We'll open up the app settings. And in here, just after this allowed host line, I'll put a comma, go into the below line and say connection strings. This is a recognized keyword for using this get connection string method. Inside this, I will say EMS database, the exact same name we mentioned here. And then in here, I'll copy this connection string and paste it here. So when we do it this way, we don't have to expose the connection string for connecting the database in this file on configuring, because everybody who has access to this code base will be able to see the connection string just like that, which is a serious security issue. That's why we use the app settings.json. But of course, yeah, here also we are exposing the connection string. This is a good way to do it. In future videos, when we talk about app settings and secrets, we'll understand how we can hide the connection string from the app settings and instead use a secret file in local to run the database. And of course, when we deploy in the internet, the connection strings will automatically be fetched from the deployment website we are using from. So yeah, that's how we'll resolve the security issue. But for now, yeah, let's focus on this. That's pretty much from the startup and app settings point of view as well. All we had to do was use this add db context method and then use this get connection string to use the app settings this particular connection strings data, right? That's it from the development. Now let's run this application and quickly check 2-3 endpoints. So first of all, I'll right click here in the API layer and set this as a startup project. Once I do that, I'll build the solution and run it. Alright, the solution is up and running. Let's open up Postman and test the endpoints. Starting with the first one, get employee by name. So I'll pass the name Shan Shah here. Let me click on send and I'm expecting a response back. But instead, I get an error. And what is it? So it says navigation property employees on entity type competency is not virtual. Okay, so the first line is good enough for us to understand what this problem is. What this error means is in the competency model, we don't have the virtual keyword added for the employees property. Let's check it out. I'll open up the entity competency and yeah, that's correct. I don't see the virtual keyword here. So let me write it right now. All right. And I'm assuming the same would happen for the other entities as well. Let me open up department and yeah, that's correct. I don't have the virtual keyword here as well and should be for the employee also. Yep. So we will have to add virtual for all these properties. The reason being, these properties are actually not there in the column, but instead it's internally connected via the foreign key and primary key relation, right? So I'll stop the solution again, click on Ctrl Shift P and build a solution. Let's run it again. Alright, it's up and running. Let's test the endpoint again. I'll click on send, and this time I'm expecting a response back. The first time actually takes some time, and yeah, there you have it. We have the response here. Awesome. Let's go to the next one, the post endpoint to create an employee. I already have the body mentioned here from the last video, database first approach. I'm going to use the same request. I'll click on send, and I get an error again. This time I see an error occurred while updating the entries. See the inner exception. So it seems the SQL datetime overflow must be between this time and this time. Okay, and what did we do in the employee repository? This is the create employee. Okay, let's scroll down. Oh, okay, that's so dumb of me. So I actually said new date time, but instead I should be saying date time dot now, which is the current time, right? So the same thing should go. Okay, let me first look for this if I have any other words. Yeah, I do have. Let's replace this with date time dot now. Okay, I'll copy this and go for the next one. Yep, and I think that should be it. Let's quickly check. Yep, none left. So yeah, let's stop again and build and run the solution again. Okay, so this time I'm pretty sure this will work. I'll click on send again, and I should get a true response back. Let's wait for it. The first time actually takes some time. That's why it took around 5 seconds, but normally it would have got resolved in not more than 500 or 900 milliseconds. So yeah, okay, I do get a true response back. We can do a quick get of for this particular name. So let me replace this with this one and click on send. I should get the response back. Yeah, the ID is 1002, and for the put I will say 1002. The body, okay, I need to change this. So this won't be department anymore. Instead this should be department ID, and let's say I assign the number 2 here, and again for the competency ID I will need to provide a number. Let's say I provide 4. All right, I'll click on send now, and I believe it should have worked. I see a 200 OK status with the true response. Great. Now if I do a get for the same employee and click on send again, I should get the updated response. Great. So yeah, the update endpoint is working as well. Finally, the get employee by ID endpoint. So I'll provide the proper ID 1002 to get the current employee, and yeah, I do get a response back. It is the same employee we just now created and updated. The competency and the department ID doesn't come properly because we haven't assigned values to it. But yeah, the endpoint still works perfectly fine. Now from the database point of view, if I run this query, I should get one more employee record in the employee table. Awesome. Alright, the testing is also done now. Now to the final part, code first approach versus database first approach. So both code and database first approach have their advantages and disadvantages depending on the situation. However, in code first approach, the database gets created from the code base, whereas in the database first approach, we create it first and then load it into the solution. In code first approach, it's very easy to quickly create the models. In database first approach, you will have to manually create the tables via query or from the GUI, graphical user interface, right? In code first approach, you have an automatic option to do a database version control, basically keeping track of all the updates we had done in the past. Whereas in the database first approach, we don't have that automatic option. We can do it from our side manually though. In code first approach, writing Fluent API code is very time consuming and tiring. Whereas in database first approach, you don't have to manually write the Fluent API code in the on model creating method. Instead, you just run the command scaffold DB context, and the context automatically gets filled with the Fluent API code for the on model creating function. So I'd like to end with this point. Code first approach is good when you are initially creating a new application, basically the first time only. Whereas database first approach is good for the next updates for the database. All you have to do is just create new tables or update the existing table and just run the command scaffolddb context. It will automatically add new properties for the existing tables and add new models for the new tables, of course. To conclude, I believe database first is better than code first approach. That's it for this video. In the next video, we will update the solutions.NET Core version from old to the latest one. If you like this video, please click on the like button. If you want to support us, please click on the subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Tell me pretty lies, look me in the face, tell me that you love me, even if it's fake.